2 men in HOA uniforms showed up at her door and told her to leave. No warrant, no paperwork that held any legal weight. Just firm voices and a clipboard, aimed at one black woman watering her roses. They didn't expect her to stay calm, or to fight back, and they certainly didn't know she was ex-CIA, with backup already watching from 2 houses down. So what happens when the hunter thinks they're hunting someone who's been trained to disappear? Before we get into the story, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep telling stories that matter, and stories that reveal what people try so hard to hide. The sun climbed slowly over the rooftops of Glenridge Estates, catching the dew on freshly mowed lawns and glinting off SUV windshields. It was the kind of morning made for calm routines. Coffee on the porch. A short walk before emails. Rachel Carrington was doing just that, sweeping the last of the pine needles off her front steps. Wearing an old cotton shirt and jeans with worn knees, a watering can rested by her side, half full. She looked like anyone else. Maybe quieter, maybe a little too quiet for a neighborhood like this. No one greeted her. A few nodded if they passed. Most didn't. She didn't mind, or at least, she didn't let it show. Inside her home, the security system hummed softly. Her notebook sat closed on the kitchen table. And from a distance, someone had just sent a signal. Because Rachel wasn't just waiting. She was preparing. The morning air in Glenridge Estates was crisp and clean, carrying with it the faint scent of pine mulch and distant sprinklers. Rachel Carrington stood on the front porch of her new home, wearing a light denim shirt rolled up at the sleeves and a pair of gardening gloves that had seen better days. She was bent over, gently adjusting the position of 2 rose bushes still in their black plastic nursery pots. The petals had a warm blush hue that reminded her of her grandmother's front yard back in Savannah, quiet strength disguised in softness. She straightened up slowly, taking in the wide street in front of her. Perfectly spaced homes, identical mailboxes, and manicured lawns. It all looked so welcoming on paper. But in person, it felt calibrated, designed, watched. A woman walked by with a small white dog tucked under one arm. She wore a pastel windbreaker and moved briskly, not out of purpose, but out of discomfort. Her eyes flicked toward Rachel, paused for half a breath, then looked away as she tightened her grip on the leash and walked faster. Rachel didn't flinch. She wasn't new to that kind of glance. It wasn't the first time people tried to make her feel like she didn't belong. And it wouldn't be the last. But this time was different. She wasn't here to prove herself. She was here to observe. The low rumble of a garbage truck echoed from the far end of the street. Rachel stepped back, giving it space as it crawled past her neighbor's driveway. The truck hissed to a stop. The arm reached out, lifted the bin, dumped it, then lowered it back down with robotic efficiency. Then it moved on, straight past Rachel's house. Her trash bin, sitting neatly at the curb with the lid closed tight, remained untouched. She watched it roll by in silence. Not a mistake. Not in this neighborhood. Rachel turned back to the porch and noticed something wedged under the doormat. She leaned down and picked up a single piece of paper, folded twice, torn at the edges, in neat handwriting, all capital letters. It read, "This neighborhood isn't for people like you." She stared at the words for a few seconds longer than she meant to. Not because they shocked her, but because of how unoriginal they were. Inside, the house was still half in boxes. She walked past a stack of kitchenware, down the hallway, and into the den where the walls were painted a muted gray. One command into the voice panel, and the security system came alive. Cameras rotated silently, windows locked with soft clicks, and a screen blinked on over the fireplace. Rachel placed the note on a side table, pulled out a manila envelope from the drawer, and labeled it in small, precise handwriting. Day 1 passive approach. Then she slipped the note inside, sealing it with a piece of clear tape. She walked through the hallway into the back of the house, to a room with no furniture. The walls were covered in corkboard. One section mapped with printed layouts of the neighborhood. Small red pins marked each house. Sticky notes held names, schedules, tendencies, nothing invasive, just patterns. Patterns said more than people ever would. She stood in front of the wall and tapped the screen beside it. A camera feed from across the street popped into view. It showed Donald Vanner, standing in his driveway, chatting with a group of men in tucked-in shirts and sunglasses. One man patted Donald's back like they were old teammates. Another pointed toward Rachel's house. Rachel didn't move, she simply narrowed her eyes and pressed record. Outside, the wind shifted slightly, brushing the curtains just enough to let in a shard of light. It fell across the note she had labeled, Day 1, casting a long, thin shadow that cut right through the word, passive. She stood still for a moment longer, then spoke softly to the empty room. Well, let's see who really doesn't belong here. The evening light softened over Glenridge Estates, painting the neatly trimmed hedges and smooth driveways in hues of gold. But inside the colonial-style home on Lot 14, something far less charming was unfolding. Donald Vanner stood at the head of a long oak table in his dining room, one hand resting lightly on a stack of printed compliance guidelines, the other gesturing as he spoke with calm authority. There was no official law in Glenridge, not one recognized by the state, at least, but Donald didn't need a title to feel like he was in charge. Over the years, he'd built a network, a quiet web of influence stitched together with whispered warnings, circulated emails, and carefully applied pressure. He called it neighborhood stewardship. Others called it Donald's Little Kingdom. 6 men sat around the table, all in their 50s and 60s, all white, all nodding as Donald outlined the importance of preserving the neighborhood's integrity. His tone never rose. He didn't need to raise it. We've built something here, he said smoothly, tapping his finger twice on the table for emphasis. And when someone new moves in, especially someone who doesn't quite understand the tone of the community, it's our responsibility to set expectations. He reached for a folder and pulled out a printed photo. It was Rachel, taken from a distance, watering her roses. She's not from here, he said, and frankly, she doesn't fit the image we've worked so hard to maintain. A few of the men shifted in their seats. One of them cleared his throat, but said nothing. Donald smiled, as if reading the discomfort. This isn't about race, it's about standards. We just need to give her guidance. Meanwhile, just across the street, a small camera nestled within the thick leaves of an ornamental tree transmitted the entire meeting to Rachel's kitchen monitor. She sat alone at the table, one hand wrapped around a warm mug of black tea that had long gone cold. Her other hand paused over the keyboard, watching every movement on the screen with a stillness that masked the rising heat under her skin. She had seen things like this before, not in a suburban dining room, but in boardrooms and consulates, in quiet corridors where power dressed itself in civility. The language changed, but the meaning never did. She rewound the clip, slowing down the footage, analyzing the micro-expressions, especially on the man to Donald's left. He looked down when Donald spoke of not fitting in. A glance, barely a second long, not agreement, guilt. Rachel opened her leather notebook, turned to the neighborhood map, and placed a thin, red tab beside Lot 17. She wrote next to it, passive influence. Watch. She didn't slam her mug down. She didn't curse. Instead, she closed the notebook and looked out the window, the evening breeze barely moving the curtain. Her reflection stared back from the glass, tired. Yes, but not afraid. She pulled open her laptop and drafted a short report. Nothing formal, just facts, timestamps, observations, each labeled and stored in a secure folder with the heading, Pattern Initiation, Glenridge. Just as she was closing the screen, a new message pinged into her inbox. No subject, no signature, just a single line. I've been there. If you need someone who's seen it up close, House 22. Rachel read it twice, then leaned back in her chair, exhaled slowly, and reached for her tea. It was still cold, but now, it didn't matter. The next move had just revealed itself. The last of the sun slipped behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across Glenridge Estates. Porch lights flicked on one by one, each glowing orb like a quiet checkpoint in Rachel's evening ritual. She walked slowly along the sidewalk, her steps steady, deliberate. It was her way of reading the neighborhood, not through conversation, but through detail. Who kept their lights on too long? Who peeked through the curtains but never opened the door? Who parked a car in the driveway but never left? As she passed the corner of the cul-de-sac and turned down Briarwood Lane, Rachel glanced up at house number 22. The porch was unassuming, geraniums in a white planter, Wind chimes that barely stirred, but tonight, one detail broke the stillness. The porch light blinked 3 times. Slowly. Pause. Then again. It wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. A signal. The exact rhythm they'd used outside Berlin. In a mission that was never written down. Rachel kept walking. At the end of the block, she turned around and circled back. This time slower, giving herself time to think. When she reached the gate of House 22, it opened before she could knock. Karina Bell stood there, older than Rachel remembered, but unmistakable. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back, and her eyes, clear, alert, wary, held a weight that didn't need explaining. They didn't exchange pleasantries. There was no time for that. Karina reached into the pocket of her gardening apron and handed Rachel a small, unmarked packet. It looked like a seed envelope. Inside, cushioned between tissue, was a USB drive. Rachel nodded once. Karina stepped back into the house without a word, and the door clicked shut behind her. Back home, Rachel sat at the kitchen table. The glow of her laptop lit up the space around her, casting soft light on the blank wall where boxes still waited to be unpacked. She plugged in the drive. There were folders, each one named by date. She clicked through them. Footage from Donald's house. Voice memos. Documents. One video showed a backyard gathering. Donald standing at the center of a small group. Flipping through pages on a clipboard. The audio was muffled, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't a community meeting. It was a strategy session. She clicked on another file. It was a spreadsheet, names, addresses, notes. Too many guests. Unkempt lawn. Spoke Spanish. Every name had a recommendation beside it. Some were labeled resolved. Others said pending. She felt a familiar heaviness in her chest. This wasn't about noise complaints. It was profiling in its most methodical form. She clicked on a final audio file. Donald's voice came through clearly this time. If she doesn't leave on her own, he said, then we'll need to take action. Subtle pressure isn't working. There was a pause. Then a second voice, sharper, lower. Fred and Mason are standing by. Just say the word. Rachel sat still, letting the silence settle. The glow of the laptop reflected in her eyes as her jaw tensed. There were no threats, no raised voices in the recording. Just planning, confidence, control. She closed the file and leaned back in her chair. She'd faced worse, but not in her own neighborhood. Not with neighbors who smiled in the morning and plotted at night. She turned back to the notebook, flipped to the map of Glenridge, and drew 2 small X's beside lots 19 and 21. Underneath them, she wrote 3 words. They're moving early. Then she circled the words in ink. Once, slowly. The sky over Glenridge was still streaked with the pale lavender of morning when Rachel stepped onto her porch. Broom in hand, the air smelled faintly of wet cement and magnolia. She moved slowly, sweeping dry leaves into a neat pile near the edge of the steps. Her movements were steady, but her senses were on alert. The previous night's recording still echoed in her mind, Donald's voice. Calm and dangerous, naming names. A low engine hum caught her ear. She didn't look up right away, but she didn't need to. The sound was too smooth, too deliberate. A black SUV pulled up to the curb across the street. Its windows tinted too dark for any sunlight to touch. The engine cut off with a subtle click. 2 men stepped out. Both wore pressed blue shirts and khaki slacks. One was holding a clipboard. The other adjusted a badge clipped to his chest. HOA compliance. They walked toward her with the kind of authority people carry when they believe no one will question them. Rachel set her broom aside, watching the rhythm of their steps. The way they avoided eye contact until they were just a few feet away. Ms. Carrington? The man with the clipboard asked. He didn't smile. Rachel nodded once. We're here to deliver a notice of community violations, he said, unfolding a few sheets of paper and holding them out to her. Noise disturbance, non-standard landscaping, obstruction of sidewalk access. These have been accumulating. You've got 48 hours to vacate the property. It's a voluntary compliance request, for now. Rachel didn't reach for the papers. She kept her hands by her side. Voluntary, she said calmly. That's an interesting word. The second man, taller, younger, face tight with impatience, shifted his weight. Eyes darting around the quiet street. Rachel noticed how his right hand hovered near his hip. Where a baton might be clipped if this were real enforcement. "I'll need a moment," she said. "Feel free to wait by the gate. I'll be calling my representative." She turned without another word and stepped inside. Once past the door, her demeanor changed. She moved quickly now, straight to the kitchen where a small control panel was hidden beneath a drawer lining. She flipped the switch. All external cameras activated, angles from the porch eaves, the garage corner, the side fence. Every movement outside now streamed to her phone and was mirrored off-site. She walked to the back pantry, where a smaller keypad waited. Her fingers moved with familiarity, keying in a short code. A light blinked once. The signal was live. Karina would know what that meant. Outside, the men paced. One checked his watch. The other kept glancing toward the house, trying to maintain the posture of someone in control. Rachel re-emerged less than 3 minutes later. She carried no phone, no folder. Her hands were empty, her face expressionless. "Thank you for waiting," she said. The tall man opened his mouth, but Rachel moved first. In a single motion, she stepped in, twisted his arm back, and brought him to the ground. A quick movement to the shoulder, a shift in leverage, and the clipboard flew from his hand. He gasped, not from pain, but from shock. The other man took a step forward, but his balance faltered. Rachel locked eyes with him. "Don't," she said, just one word, low and even. He hesitated, and then from down the street, Karina appeared. She wasn't running, just walking with purpose. A phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "This is Bell, code Gray. 2 individuals at Glenridge. Unverified authority. Coordinates sent." The taller man groaned, still pinned on the porch. The second one, Mason, according to his badge, held up his hands, suddenly remembering how fragile pretense could be when someone called it out. Rachel released her grip. She didn't step back. She didn't look away. These weren't men trained for conflict. They were trained for compliance theater, expecting their uniforms and their tone to do the work. They had walked onto her porch thinking she was alone, thinking she would fold. But Rachel had unlearned fear long before she'd learned to grow roses. From across the street, a curtain twitched. Another neighbor watching. Another witness. Silent for now. Rachel looked up at the sky. The sun had broken over the rooftops. And the game had officially changed. The first sound was metal on concrete, sharp and final. Fred hit the ground with a thud. His arm twisted behind him, a pained groan escaping as his face pressed into the smooth pavement. Mason stumbled backward, trying to make sense of what just happened, one hand fumbling for the radio clipped to his belt. He barely touched it before Rachel stepped in again. One swift kick sent it skidding across the porch and into the flower bed. There was no shouting, no chaos, just the sound of breathing, fast and panicked from the 2 men, and Rachel's calm movements as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a zip tie. She knelt beside Fred, secured his wrists, and moved to Mason with the same measured efficiency. Karina stood a few feet away on the sidewalk, her arms crossed, scanning the perimeter. She didn't interfere. She didn't need to. Rachel was operating the way she had years ago, under pressure, with control, the kind of control that comes not from anger, but from clarity. Mason finally spoke. "You can't. This isn't." But the words fell apart as Rachel pulled the second tie tight around his wrists. "You came to my home," she said softly, not looking at him. "You wore something that wasn't real. You knocked on my door and told me to disappear." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Karina stepped closer, raising her phone slightly, her thumb pressing into the center of the screen. A soft beep confirmed the transmission. "G7 active," she said. "Target secure. Need silent pickup. 1 female operator on scene." From across the street, a curtain moved. A silhouette froze behind it. Then slowly, a phone rose, small, discreet, the lens just barely visible. Another neighbor, recording, bearing witness. Rachel finished her work, stepping back from the 2 restrained men, both now seated awkwardly against the porch railing. Their faces flushed, not just from pain or fear, but from something else, something colder. Humiliation. Fred tried to lift his head. "You don't know who we are," he muttered. Rachel crouched down to meet his eyes. "No," she said, "but I know exactly what you're pretending to be." The words sat there between them, heavy and undeniable. And then, without sirens or lights, 2 black SUVs rolled to a stop outside the house. Their engines cut at once, synchronized like clockwork. 4 men in plain clothes stepped out, all wearing earpieces, moving with quiet urgency. One showed ID. Rachel didn't ask to see it, she already knew. 2 impersonators, Karina said, gesturing. Attempted forced eviction under false pretenses. Armed with badges, not authority. The agents moved swiftly. Fred and Mason didn't resist. They were too stunned, too off balance. Their posture wasn't defiant anymore, it was small, inward, unraveling. One of the agents paused before loading Fred into the SUV. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Rachel, "do you want to file a statement?" Rachel shook her head, then paused. "Not yet," she replied, "but I will, and when I do, I want it on record who backed them." The man nodded and turned away. Rachel remained still, her arms folded, as the doors shut and the vehicles pulled away. Tires silent against the asphalt. The air seemed to shift, heavier, yet cleaner. The street was quiet again. But the quiet had changed. Something had cracked, just slightly. She looked out toward the lawn. The sky above already washed in sunlight. Pale and bright, the roses she planted were beginning to open. Even the one she thought wouldn't survive the move. She stood alone on her porch and said the words under her breath. Not to Karina, not to the agents, not even to the men who had just been taken away. This is a free country. But sometimes, you have to take back your piece of it with your own hands. And then she turned and went inside, not slamming the door, but closing it with a finality that didn't need a sound to be heard. The house was dark except for the soft glow of Rachel's monitor in the corner of the den. It was close to midnight. The neighborhood quiet again after the tremors of the morning. But for Rachel, there was no real quiet anymore, only lulls between steps. She sat with her back straight, the stillness around her broken only by the faint hum of the cooling fan. On her screen was a series of folders, each labeled in her careful handwriting. Donald, backyard. WA notes, June 3rd. Audio_extract_Mason. And the most recent, Porch_incident_full. She didn't hesitate. One by one, she copied them into a secure drive. Names, footage, voice clips, even the anonymous letters, all of it. She zipped the file, encrypted it twice, and addressed it to an email string that hadn't been used in nearly 5 years. She typed only one line in the body. "You'll know what to do." Then she hit send. In the minutes that followed, she didn't get up or move. She just watched the cursor blink on the empty reply field, as if daring something to arrive. She wasn't expecting an immediate answer. The people on the other end didn't deal in quick responses, they moved quietly. When things needed to be cleaned up without press, her phone buzzed gently against the table. A name flashed across the screen. Karina. Rachel answered without speaking. "I've been contacted," Karina said. "They're calling me in. Witness protocol. Internal Affairs is opening a file." Rachel's throat felt dry, not from nerves, from knowing this wasn't just about her anymore. "They're pulling Vanner's financials," Karina continued. "His name's tied to a consulting firm that's been managing 3 other subdivisions across the country. All using the same language in their bylaws. All filed under community-led compliance." Rachel leaned back in her chair, her fingers clasped loosely in her lap. She closed her eyes for a brief second. "They're not just petty," she murmured. "They're organized." And that changed everything. The next day, the media hadn't picked it up yet, but Rachel knew that wouldn't last. She could already feel the tension building. People were still peeking through blinds, still pretending none of it had happened. But somewhere in the background, the floor beneath their feet was shifting. Later that evening, Rachel stepped outside to get the mail. A single envelope waited inside the box. No return address. She opened it on the porch. Inside was a single sheet. Typed, formal. "We appreciate your vigilance. Further coordination to follow. Stand by for next phase." No name. But the font, the phrasing, it was familiar. Governmental without saying so. Clean, quiet power. She walked back into the house slowly, her mind heavier than before. Not with fear, but with the weight of what she now carried. The phone rang again. This time, it was a number she hadn't seen in years. She hesitated before answering. Carrington. The voice said. Male. Low. Steady. It's been a while. She didn't speak, but she didn't hang up either. You used to hate calling for backup. The man continued, his voice touched with dry memory. Guess some things do change. Rachel exhaled slowly. Not backup, she said, just closure. There was a pause. We've reviewed what you sent. He said, you were right, and this time, you won't be alone. We're opening a nationwide probe. What started on your porch ends in court. Rachel looked out the window. The streetlights flickered softly. A neighbor pulled into their driveway and didn't look up. I'm not after a fight, she said. I know, he replied, but you found one anyway. Then the line went dead. She stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence settle. Before walking over to her map, she reached for a red pen, circled Glenridge Estates, and wrote 2 words beside it. Start point. Monday morning arrived with the hush of early dew and birdsong. But in Glenridge Estates, the calm was only on the surface. Inside dozens of homes, phones buzzed, laptops refreshed, televisions flicked on earlier than usual. A video, just under 90 seconds, had begun making the rounds. It showed a woman, steady, composed, disarming and subduing 2 men in HOA-style uniforms who had come to her porch demanding her removal. It showed them faltering, flailing, and then bound on the ground like children caught in a lie. There was no yelling in the clip, no dramatic music, just real footage, captured from a camera mounted on Karina Bell's home across the street. The title read, "HOA Bullies Picked the Wrong House." By 9 a.m., it had over 200,000 views on Twitter. By noon, the hashtags were trending. Hashtag Porch Justice. Hashtag Fake HOA. Hashtag She Fought Back. Rachel didn't check any of it. She didn't need to. The story was now moving without her. She was no longer the narrator. She had become the image people passed to one another. Shared in group chats, quoted in Reddit threads. To some, she was a symbol of quiet resistance. To others, a warning that not everyone who moves into your neighborhood will play by your rules. The local news picked up the clip that afternoon. A retired federal officer defends herself against false HOA agents. The anchor announced with the stiff polish of someone who had rehearsed the line 5 times. And raises questions about how far some neighborhood groups are willing to go to maintain control. Rachel didn't answer her door that day. She didn't return calls from journalists. She didn't read comments. She swept the front steps. She watered the flowers. She walked an elderly neighbor's dog named Max, who had grown fond of her despite barking at everyone else. The neighbors watched her more now, but the way they watched had shifted. Less suspicion, more uncertainty, like they were trying to figure out who exactly they had misjudged. Some of the little flags posted near the curb, those plastic signs with "Proud HOA Home," printed in cheerful blue, began disappearing. Pulled quietly in the night. Others stayed up, but the homes behind them drew their blinds tighter. That afternoon, while Rachel trimmed the edges of her lawn, she saw a familiar figure approaching from the sidewalk. Mr. Fredrickson, white, mid-70s, retired teacher, lived 3 doors down. He had been one of the first to avoid eye contact when she moved in. One of the many who had said nothing when the letter appeared on her porch. He was holding a brown paper bag with both hands, like it might fall apart if he wasn't careful. His steps were slow, but deliberate. Rachel didn't move to greet him. She kept pruning, her hands steady, letting him close the distance. When he reached the porch, he didn't step up, just stood at the base of the stairs. "I saw the video," he said quietly. "I saw you." Rachel looked up, but didn't say anything. Fredrickson held out the bag. "It's apple pie," he said. "My wife used to bake it. I'm not as good, but I thought maybe." He stopped himself, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Placed it on top of the bag. "I should have said something weeks ago, when they skipped your trash bin. When I saw the letter, I thought, it wasn't my place." Rachel took the bag without a word. "I'm sorry," he added, for the silence. She nodded once, then stepped back inside. The screen door clicked gently behind her. Inside the bag was the pie, still warm, and the note in his neat, slanted script. It read, "I was quiet. I won't be again." Rachel placed the bag on the counter, poured herself a glass of water. and stood there in her kitchen as the sunlight slanted across the floor. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the air inside the house wasn't holding its breath. Outside, someone new was watching, not with suspicion, but with thought, and maybe that, too, was a beginning. The light that morning had a softness to it, the kind that only came with the first chill of autumn. It angled low through the maple trees lining Glenridge Estates, brushing rooftops with gold and casting long, quiet shadows across empty driveways. Rachel sat alone in her living room, back straight, pen in hand. The leather-bound notebook resting on her lap was worn at the edges, its pages creased by time and weather. The ink inside it faded but precise. It wasn't a diary, it had never been for emotion. It was a ledger of moments that mattered. She added one more line. Final assignment. Don't let silence outlive justice. She stared at the sentence longer than she intended to, letting the pen rest across the binding like a weight. Then she closed the book gently, pressing her hand over the cover for a breath before placing it back in the drawer where she kept it, behind the spare keys and the garden clippers. But always reachable. The house was quiet, not just from the absence of noise, but from the absence of tension. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the air inside belonged to her. Rachel stepped out onto the front porch, letting the door click shut behind her. The old camera above the archway was gone. She had taken it down the night before, wrapped it in cloth, and boxed it away, not because she no longer believed in vigilance, but because she believed in choosing when and how to use it. There was no need to watch everything, not when the watching had already changed the watchers. She looked across the street. 2 houses had repainted their shutters. The lawn signs were gone. One neighbor, Mr. Thompson, gave her a short wave while clipping his rosebush. She returned it with a small nod. Nothing dramatic, but not distant, either. The porch smelled of pine cleaner and earth. She stepped down to water the planters, pausing only when she heard the soft rattling sound of bicycle wheels turning over dry leaves. A child was pedaling up the sidewalk, slightly wobbly, with the posture of someone still learning not to be afraid of falling. The girl couldn't have been more than 9. Her hair was tied in 2 tight braids, and her backpack had a cartoon astronaut on it, faded by sun. As she passed Rachel's driveway, she slowed, stopped. Rachel stayed still, watering can in hand, letting the silence fill the gap between them. The girl looked up. "Are you the lady from the video?" she asked, voice barely more than a whisper. Rachel didn't answer, not right away. The girl glanced down, twisting the handlebars with one hand. "My name's Maya," she said. "We just moved in. Mom said it's gonna be better here. But someone told me I wasn't supposed to play in the Circle Park." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't doing anything bad," the girl added quickly. "Just drawing chalk." Silence settled between them again, the kind that doesn't need to be filled, just shared. Then the girl looked up again, eyes more serious this time. "Can you teach me," she asked, "how to be quiet and not lose?" Rachel felt her throat tighten, not from emotion, but from recognition. She'd heard the same question 100 ways from younger agents, from tired civilians, from herself. She put down the watering can. "You don't have to be quiet," she said, "but if you are, make sure it's your choice. And if someone tells you that you don't belong, you don't need to fight them with anger." The girl waited. Rachel gave a small smile, the kind that didn't need to stretch to be sincere. "Don't wait for someone to give you your place," she said. "If you have to take it, but never take it with hate." The girl nodded, like she was filing something away inside her. Then she pushed off and started pedaling again. Not fast, but straight. Rachel watched her go, her figure growing smaller between the trees until she disappeared around the bend. She stood there a moment longer, hand resting on the porch rail, then turned back toward the house. Behind her, the morning kept unfolding like it always had, but something about it felt different now. Not finished, not solved, but shifted. And sometimes, that's where the real change begins. She didn't raise her voice, but somehow, the whole neighborhood started listening. No doors slammed, no speeches made, just a woman who stayed and watered her roses. Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't the ones we fight out loud, but the ones we quietly refuse to lose. And maybe the real question isn't who had the power, but who finally chose to use it differently. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, or even just a pause, subscribe to Undercover Truths for more stories that echo long after they end. Thank you for watching.